time I've been making YouTube videos, I've encountered the same story a few times. It's the story of a content creator or entertainer whose fanbase turns on them. I'm fascinated by this story because of the many different ways in which a group of people can grow to hate something they once loved. With Jason Genova, you could say that the fandom was ironic from the start. People came to his videos to laugh at the mentally disabled kid who thought he was going to be a bodybuilding movie star UFC fighter. Over time, Jason's lying and scamming nature, among many other negative behavioral traits, caused a genuine hatred to build in the community that coalesced around his channel. As for Anthony Cumia, he had one of the most devoted fan bases you'll ever see. If you remember the attack on the media, or the numerous fights Opie and Anthony had with other radio shows, you will understand how dedicated the pests were to the show they loved, and Anthony in particular. But all it took for the fans to turn was Anthony's inability to take criticism after a bad roast set. In the case of Brendan Schaub, the turn has been slower and more gradual. It's hard to pinpoint a specific moment that has caused so many people to start hating something they used to enjoy. You could boil it down to Schaub becoming increasingly arrogant and thin-skinned as his fame has grown, but I think that is an oversimplification, and the topic is worth a little more exploration. I think the best place to start this video is with Schaub's MMA debut. Having spent most of his youth and early adulthood attempting an unsuccessful football career, Brendan Schaub came to MMA late in life. However, given the fact that the heavyweight division tends to be an old man's division, 25 years old probably wasn't that late to begin fighting, especially for a relatively athletic guy like Schaub. Despite his age, it should be said that Schaub did show some promise early in his career. In less than a year, he racked up 4 straight wins by knockout or TKO. From here, Brendan would take part in the 10th season of The Ultimate Fighter, which would bring him to the attention of the wider MMA audience. It was a stroke of luck for Schaub, as Season 10 is one of the most noteworthy seasons in the show's history. The all-heavyweight season featured famous Metal Thing avoider Kimbo Slice, as well as the now legendary feud between Rampage Jackson and Rashad Evans. Schaub would do well in the season, finishing all of his fights, and eventually meeting Roy Nelson in the finale. Unfortunately for Schaub, this fight would be the beginning of a tradition of getting knocked out in comical fashion. This was by no means the end for Schaub's UFC career, though. If you are familiar with The Ultimate Fighter, you will know that the runner-up is usually given a chance at competing in the UFC, and Schaub made the best of this opportunity by going on a 4-fight win streak that included wins over Chase Gormley, Chris Tuchscherer, Gabriel Gonzaga, and finally a knockout win over MMA legend Mirko Cro Cop. In my opinion, this was probably the peak of Brendan's career, but it was also the point at which people started expressing animosity towards him. When this fight went down, Cro Cop was definitely past his prime, and he was coming off a knockout loss and a stinker for the ages against Frank Mir. But he was still Cro Cop, one of the most beloved fighters in MMA history. When Schaub delivered a follow-up punch on an already unconscious Cro Cop, it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. The animosity towards Schaub grew in the build-up to his fight with Big Nog at UFC 134 in August of 2011. Nogueira is another MMA icon, and Schaub's attempts to position himself as the legend killer with a win over Big Nog made him seem arrogant in the eyes of many MMA fans at the time. I remember watching this fight live and reading the comments about the fight on MMA websites, and I don't think there was a single person who wasn't overjoyed when Nog flatlined Brendan. In his next fight, Schaub was on the receiving end of a knockout from Ben Rothwell that will live on in memes forever. He was able to bounce back with wins against LeVar Johnson and Matt Mitrione, but then managed to embarrass himself with his performance at Metamoris 2 against Roberto Cyborg Abreu. It's not uncommon for MMA fighters to compete in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu matches against high-level black belts, and nobody would have given Schaub a hard time if he came up short against a top-tier grappler like Abreu. What Brendan did was probably worse than if he looked like an idiot and got submitted in seconds. Brendan refused to engage with Cyborg, and the match was declared a draw. As bad as that is, Schaub's post-fight comments were even more embarrassing.
So your objective was to shut down his game?
Yeah, with my training through, Huron and Henner Gracie and Jason Manley, the goal was to shut him down. For me, it was a success. Shutting him down for 20 minutes was a success for Brendan Schaub.
As long as I live as a fighter, I'll never run from a fight like that.
I've never ran.
No problem.
I've never ran. I've shut things down. Ask LeVar Johnson.
The only
Ask
thing.
Mirko Cro Cop.
No problem.
Gabriel Gonzaga.
Well.
I've never ran.
Schaub's 2-fight win streak would be snapped in June of 2014 when he wound up on the wrong side of an incredibly boring decision against Andrei Arlovsky, which brings us to the Travis Browne fight. Now, I've already nitpicked the way Brendan described this fight during his comedy special in another video. The biggest complaint Schaub's defenders had with that video was that, supposedly, every comic lies, and I was overanalyzing jokes. I want to make something clear. I know perfectly well that comedians lie in their sets. One of my favorite comedians is Anthony Jeselnik, and his act is almost entirely made of jokes about things that never actually happened. That is okay, because the lie is in service of making the joke funnier. But with Schaub, the lies he tells during the story of his fight with Travis Browne only serve to make Schaub look better, to make his story seem more heroic, and it's frankly pathetic.
So my dad took me out of that, put me in wrestling. Then from wrestling, I went to jiu-jitsu. Jiu-jitsu to boxing. I'm fully immersed to become the world champion. Fast forward, 20 years later, I'm in pursuit of this exact goddamn dream. It's December 6, 2014. We're in Las Vegas, Nevada, MGM Grand. Here we go, man. Since I was 10 years old, I visualized this exact goddamn night. My name's on the freaking marquee at the MGM Grand. Before me, it was Conor McGregor, Brock Lesnar, Vander Holyfield, Mike Tyson. Now it's my turn.
That being said, I'm not going to nitpick every lie Schaub has told about the Travis Browne fight. I'm only going to focus on one, the biggest one. That is, the way Schaub has painted the fight as the moment he decided he was done fighting and wanted to follow his passion for comedy.
Brian Cal and I took a taxi from Las Vegas, Nevada to Los Angeles, California at 3 in the morning. And we came up with a game plan of me never getting punched in the face again and pursuing my passion of stand-up comedy.
That is simply not true. If you're familiar with Schaub's story, or even just familiar with Joe Rogan, you will probably remember the episode of The Fighter and the Kid that took place after the Travis Browne fight, where Joe viciously tore Brendan down.
You know, it's not like you don't have good qualities, but if you had a wrestling match with Cain Velasquez, how well do you think you'd do?
Straight up wrestling?
Yeah.
I think people would be surprised.
Really? You think so?
Mm-hmm.
I think you'd be surprised. I really do. I think he'd fuck you up.
For just shy of 2 hours, Joe repeatedly told Schaub that he wasn't an elite fighter, wasn't committed to fighting, and suggested he retire before he suffered any more brain damage. I don't like Schaub, but I thought this was a dick move when I saw it in 2014, and I still think it was a dick move after watching it again with the knowledge hindsight provides. I understand the idea of tough love and wanting to be brutally honest with your friends when you think they're making a mistake. But aside from occasionally saying, "You're a funny guy who could do something else," this was a fucking crucifixion. Schaub said at the beginning of the conversation that he didn't want to talk about the fight on the podcast, but felt like he owed it to the fans who stood by him during the loss. That didn't stop Rogan from going in on him like a prison bitch with Kool-Aid on his lips. Anytime Brendan would try to defend himself, Joe would come back twice as hard. He even brought out a Terry Norris impression.
But when you start seeing a guy like Terry Norris, when you see those old guys, this day I go into the boxing is what I do. That fucking guy didn't always used to talk like that, man. And it creeps up on you slow. And if that happened to you, it would be a fucking terrible tragedy. Especially because you have the ability to do other shit. You're a funny dude.
Brendan did raise one good point when he said it was easy for somebody like Joe, who is set for life, to tell somebody without a safety net to gamble with their life and future.
But Joe, I think it's easy for you to sit there with whatever, $12 million in the bank and say, oh, you need to stop doing this. Okay, I'll just stop doing it.
It doesn't matter.
And do podcasts for fucking the next 40 years.
Joe took this personally, of course, because he is an out-of-touch multimillionaire who doesn't realize that for every success story like his own, there are 1,000 people in LA who tried to chase their dreams and ended up working at P.F. Chang's. Joe's belief that anybody can drop their soul-crushing 9-to-5 job and start a podcast about bow hunting is one of his traits that I truly hate, but that is a rant for a future series. If I were to speculate, I think Schaub still resents Joe for publicly humiliating him, which is probably why he credits Callan in his special for helping him transition into a comedy career. This is a lie for another reason, though. Brendan didn't retire for nearly a year after his fight with Travis Browne. In his response to Joe Rogan, Brendan said on multiple occasions that he was going to continue fighting.
Big Brown.
Yeah.
Ideal scenario. Who or when and who do you fight next?
It's $1 million question.
More importantly, when?
When? No idea. Couldn't tell you. I have a 60-day suspension. due to these stitches in my lip. I don't know. I'd say mid next year. How about that? Mid next year is what I would think. And then again, it depends what we do. Stay at heavyweight 205. Depends what we do. But we're for sure fighting.
As 2015 went on, he even toyed with the idea of a move to light heavyweight.
The plan is 205, and I will fight in 2015 at 205 light heavyweight. Can you imagine when I win, looking over at Rogan, being like, "I think you'd be surprised." I'm gonna get on the mic. I'm gonna get on the mic. I'm gonna stare Rogan directly in the eyes and go, "Are you surprised?" That's what I'm gonna do. That's all I think about.
What ultimately made Brennan retire from MMA was the deal the UFC signed with Reebok. In the future, I'd like to make a video about the Reebok deal, because it is universally considered one of, if not the biggest fuck-up in UFC history.
Ladies and gentlemen, the UFC Kid.
UFC Fight Kit. The United States of America!
Aside from the many hilarious mistakes Reebok made while attempting to roll out their new line of fight kits and other merch, the real issue that didn't sit well with fighters and fans alike was the way the Reebok deal would affect fighter pay. Before the deal, fighters could have a variety of in-ring sponsorships, typically via patches on their shorts. Old school fans will remember some of the classics like Condom Depot and Dude Wipes. Having individual sponsorships meant that fighters could make a ton of money, sometimes as much or more than they would have earned from their purse. When the Reebok deal was implemented, fighters were not permitted to have any other sponsors during fights or fight week. Some fighters were even called out for wearing apparel made by other companies. Matt Mitrione literally did an interview barefoot because the UFC wouldn't allow him to wear Nikes on camera, even though they were just his shoes, not a sponsorship.
Honestly, where are your shoes?
They're outside. I had some J's on my feet, and that was not part of the attire.
Really?
So I came in barefooted.
The worst part was that fighters were now only making a fixed amount of money based upon the number of fights they had in the UFC. As the Reebok deal was being rolled out, Brennan was one of its most vocal critics. When asked how the Reebok deal would compare to his previous earnings, Brennan claimed that he had made 6 figures in sponsorships for each of his last 6 fights. With the Reebok deal, he would have been losing at least 90% of his pay from sponsorships. Of course, this claim was dismissed by sentient beefsteak tomato Dana White. In a now deleted appearance on Off the Record, Dana tried to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the claim that Schaub was making 6 figures from sponsorships, but the financials were later confirmed by Joe Rogan.
Because the $100,000 you were making from sponsorships, which is 100% real and legit and certified and authenticated, proven.
Now, it might seem like I took a huge detour, and I did, but I did so for a reason. It's important for people to understand the real reason Brennan retired. When he announced his retirement on the Joe Rogan Experience in October of 2015, he directly cited the money he would have lost from the Reebok deal and the growing success of the Fighter and the Kid podcast.
The UFC wanted me to sign the license deal with Reebok and the random testing, the VADA test or whatever the fuck it is.
The reason I find this so important to mention is because it isn't just an exaggeration on a comedy special. It's part of a larger pattern of lies, delusional behavior, and general douchebaggery that has been getting worse and worse over time. Whether you love or hate Schaub, it's hard to deny that the man has found a good hustle. The Fighter and the Kid has been very successful and allowed Schaub to branch out into several other podcasts, like The King and the Sting and The Big Brown Breakdown, which later turned into the Below the Belt podcast. He did analysis for Mayweather vs. McGregor, he has his own show on Showtime, and is a cast member of Play by Play on Bravo. Brennan prides himself on his beast of a work ethic, but there is a serious quantity over quality issue here. This is a problem with podcasts in general, but it's especially bad with all of the LA comics who orbit Rogan. They all have 3 podcasts that put out 2 to 3 episodes a week, and they ran out of interesting things to say after about 10 episodes combined. To make matters worse, they're constantly going on each other's podcasts, so if you've seen a handful of podcasts from these people, you've probably heard all of their interesting stories and can predict what they'll say in just about any situation. I personally can't wait for the next Sober October, where Joe brags about how much he can exercise, and they all take turns making fun of Bert's Mickey Mantle jeans. What unnecessarily offensive thing will Ari Shaffir say? Get your laughing hats ready, guys. The problem is more pronounced with Schaub because he is really bad at everything he attempts. The man's career hinges upon speaking, but he can't put together 2 sentences without his brain short-circuiting and firing off some incomprehensible gibberish.
It's all just this big pile of, I should say, this big vat of stew, this entertainment stew. Fajitas are the meat, man. They're the nuts and the potatoes in there, right? So,
do you know that painting that Michelangelo did where those 2 people are naked touching each other in the air or whatever?
16th.
Yeah, 16th Chapel.
Yeah. I'm not throwing Pearl under the bench here, but you ever tried throwing a trolley, Chen?
No, I don't know what you're talking about, actually. Throwing a trolley. Is that what you said?
Conor McGregor threw a trolley through a bus window. Not putting the carrot in front of the horse's face there, but what's after this? Hey, photographers, you Blockbuster. The new iPhone's Netflix.
I like the way the dick tastes. I like the way the dick tastes.
They were talking about fraternity?
Fraternal.
Now we have Epidemic. Now we got Vitor Belfort.
Epidemic.
Ready for this? This is a protege. Had 0 amateur fights. 0. Not 1. Not 450 like Lomachenko. Not 350 like Triple G. He's the youngest champion ever and has 0 background. That would be a protege. Aaron Pico would
Prodigy.
be a prodigy.
Prodigy.
Forget what it's called. Incarus? The documentary on Russian blood doping.
Oh, yeah.
That camera's going to come back like a goddamn shark white's nose. Just fucking.
And no, it's always a risk.
But I wonder if those statistics are if with people with safes.
I know Brendan has been hit in the head a lot, but the degeneration in his speech over just the last few years has been startling. He used to sound fairly clear-headed and could make a coherent point without too much effort.
You know what? It's a fight. So I'm ready for anything. I think that's a big asset. Is I'm ready for it to go anywhere, wherever Johnny wants to take it. He can keep if he wants to keep it on his feet. That's definitely in my favor. If he wants to go to the ground, that's fine too.
Now he is a hurricane of Vossian mispronunciation and malapropisms that put Ricky from Trailer Park Boys to shame.
It's like a zebra getting his fucking ear starched off by a fucking eagle or something.
If I'm trying to be fair to Schaub, he has suffered a ton of concussions, and he was never Conor McGregor or Chael Sonnen to begin with. Brendan's poor oratory skills are the least of his worries, though. He's just an absolutely terrible podcaster. It's the most noticeable during his solo endeavors, because he doesn't have a funnier, more talented comedian to carry him. So for the time being, we're going to put the fighter and the kid, and the king and the sting to the side, and focus mainly on Below the Belt with Brendan Schaub. You would think that a podcast about combat sports would be a cakewalk for a retired MMA fighter, but you would be wrong. For starters, Brendan usually spends the first 20 minutes of an 80-minute podcast talking about his life, his stand-up comedy, or bantering with his Korean manservant. It's so bad that the top comment on any Below the Belt video will be the timestamp for when the fight talk starts. Not that the fight talk is any better. The way this works is that the previously mentioned Korean manservant will set Brendan up with headlines and current events from the combat sports world, and Brendan will give his take on them. How that goes will depend entirely on whether or not Brendan has seen Luke Thomas's most recent video. If he has, Brendan will regurgitate whatever he can remember Luke saying in a patois of brain damage. Somewhere in the middle of this disaster, Brendan will stop talking about fights to painfully read an ad from one of his sponsors.
Then I heard about Candid, the clear alternative to braces. And you know what? I'm all in. For reals, Candid, please send me some. Candid has an orthodontist who is licensed in your state and creates a treatment plan for you. And Candid only uses experienced orthodontists, not some dude just, let's fix your teeth. No, we're talking about the real deal. They even create a 3D preview of what the final results are going to look like. That's what Candid did for me. I need them so bad. Now that I've approved my 3D preview, Canada is creating custom clear aligners that will be sent to me directly.
I know these are live reads, but why not practice them a few times beforehand so he doesn't get tongue-tied or otherwise make himself look like a total moron? By the way, these reads are in the middle of the podcast and usually bring the fight talk to a screeching halt anyway. So other than pure laziness, there really is no reason not to pre-record them and make a few attempts until you find the right take. Either way, once old cauliflower brain is done stumbling through the live read, we get back to the fight talk. Now, if Brendan hasn't seen Luke Thomas's most recent video, he will typically do one of two things. Either he will literally just make his predictions based upon Wikipedia records and betting lines.
Is there a line on Greg Hardy? Oh, wow. -115, -105. Makes sense. Boy, Vic's an underdog. Ray Borg's a favorite. Shout out to Ray Borg. Orlovsky, Ben Rothwell. Yep, makes sense. Rothwell's the favorite. Fun card. I'll definitely be watching it in Indy backstage.
Or he will say whatever idiotic nonsense comes into his mind at the time. Part of this is because he legitimately doesn't know anything about MMA.
Where I'm looking at it.
Is this the CompuStrike here?
Yeah, well, this is Fight Metric.
So Verdum, round 1, looks like he landed more, right? Is that what it's saying? Landed by target?
No, so he
by
landed,
position?
so he threw 30 punches and he landed 40%. Overeem threw 10 punches, landed 50%.
I understand. But wouldn't you weigh the fact that Verdum landed 12-5 in the head?
No, because Verdum threw
13-10 in the body.
Because Verdum threw almost triple the amount of punches to get that.
But you kind of
and didn't do damage.
He didn't do damage, but I would but 24 strikes to the legs versus 6 strikes. If I have no other metric to go by, because neither one of them got any damage in that first round, I'm going to give it to Verdum.
However, there is another factor at play here. Daniel Cormier hit the nail on the head about Schaub's analytical style after Brendan tried to imply that the panel for UFC on Fox were hired because of their race and not their ability.
Sometimes you look at UFC Tonight and like, all right, is that the best panel possible? Or are you just trying to check off the boxes? We get it, UFC Tonight, Fox. You're not racist. We get it. You have an all-black panel. We get it. We get it, man. You know, now I'm going to ask you again, are those the best brains and speakers for the art to the general audience?
Cormier had this to say during a Bloody Elbow interview. Quote, "The crazy thing is Fox doesn't even hire the talent. The UFC puts them in those positions. So I don't really know what was intended with what he said. But Brendan has developed a style where he's shocking people with some of the things that he says. And when you start to do that, you're almost obligated to stay down that path. Sometimes Skip Bayless says things that are just ridiculous, but it's almost like he has to, because that's what we've come to expect from him. It's kind of what he built. I think Brendan has developed that type of style. You know what? It's obviously working for him. He's got a show on Showtime, 2 massively successful podcasts, and a comedy career. I think in this day and age that, oh my god, I can't believe he said that tone is really valuable in the sports community. That's why these debate shows are so popular around the world. You've got one guy speaking facts and the other guy saying random crazy shit, and everybody's like, oh, I can't believe that dude just said that. That type of on-air personality has gotten really big in today's society." End quote. There is a reason they pay Daddy Daniel the big bucks to do commentary and analysis. He's an intelligent and insightful guy, and his breakdown of Brendan is spot on. There are countless examples